At 12:28 a.m., the control room of reactor number 4 was brightly lit, calm in a way that felt earned, almost routine. The men inside had been awake for hours already, surrounded by panels of switches, dials, and blinking indicator lights that had become as familiar as their own hands. This was not a room built for drama. It was built for certainty. Thick concrete walls, redundant systems, procedures stacked on procedures. Outside, the city of Pripyat slept peacefully, unaware that less than 3 kilometers away, history was quietly lining up its first move. The night shift was never supposed to be difficult. The most demanding work at Chernobyl happened during the day, when senior engineers and supervisors filled the room. Night shifts were for maintenance, for watching numbers stay where they were supposed to stay. And tonight, the plan was simple. A safety test, one that had already failed before. One that should have been finished years earlier. One more checkbox in a system that prized completion over comfort. By 12:30 a.m., the reactor was running at a fraction of its normal power. That alone was unusual. Nuclear reactors like stability. They are designed to live in narrow bands of operation, where physics behaves predictably. What was happening now was outside the comfort zone, and everyone in the room knew it. But procedures were procedures, and the test demanded low power. The younger operators followed instructions passed down from above them, written by people who were not in the room, not awake, not watching the numbers drift in ways that felt off. At 12:35 a.m., a problem appeared that should have stopped everything. Reactor power dropped far lower than planned, plunging into a range that the designers of the RBMK reactor had always feared. At that level, the reactor became unstable, vulnerable to a phenomenon known as xenon poisoning, where byproducts of the nuclear reaction begin to choke the reactor's ability to sustain itself. The safest move was clear. Shut it down. Reset. Try another day. But another day meant explaining delays, and explaining delays meant consequences. So they kept going. One by one, safeguards were disabled. Not dramatically, not with alarms screaming, just quiet switches flipped, protocols overridden, systems temporarily silenced so the test could proceed. Each action made sense on its own. Together, they were removing the very layers designed to protect the reactor from human optimism. By 12:45 a.m., the reactor was barely holding together. Control rods, long graphite-tipped columns designed to absorb neutrons and slow the reaction, had been withdrawn far beyond what was considered safe. The operators knew the numbers. They could see them glowing on the panels in front of them. But nothing catastrophic had happened yet, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. At 1 a.m., the room settled into an uneasy rhythm. Voices were low. Orders were repeated. Pens scratched notes onto clipboards. Somewhere deep inside the reactor core, the physics were changing faster than the instruments could fully explain. Water was flowing through channels not designed for this balance of heat and pressure. Steam bubbles formed and collapsed, altering the reactor's behavior in subtle, compounding ways. At 1:10 a.m., the test was finally ready to begin. The idea was simple. Simulate a power loss. See if the turbine's momentum could generate enough electricity just for a short time to power emergency cooling systems before diesel generators kicked in. On paper, it was elegant. In reality, it depended on everything else behaving perfectly. At 1:22 a.m., the turbine was shut down. Inside the reactor, power began to surge. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't explosive, it was a climb, rapid, silent, invisible. The instruments lagged behind the physics. The operators saw rising numbers, but not fast enough to understand how quickly they were losing control. Someone called out the increase. Someone else suggested inserting control rods. At 1:23:40 a.m., the decision was made. The AZ5 button was pressed. It was the reactor's final safeguard. The big red button, the emergency shutdown. Insert all control rods, kill the reaction, end the test. In every other reactor design in the world, this would have saved them. In Chernobyl, it sealed their fate. The graphite tips of the control rods entered the core first, displacing neutron-absorbing water with graphite that briefly accelerated the reaction instead of stopping it. In less than a second, reactor power spiked to levels never imagined by its designers. Fuel rods ruptured, pressure skyrocketed, channels burst apart. At 1:23:44 a.m., the first explosion tore through the reactor core. It was not nuclear, it was mechanical. Steam expanding violently, ripping apart 1,000-ton concrete slabs as if they were paper. The second explosion followed moments later, likely hydrogen igniting in open air. The roof was gone, the core was open, and the night sky above Ukraine was suddenly glowing blue. Inside the control room, the shockwave hit like a physical punch. Panels shook, lights flickered, some instruments went dark, others went insane, needles slamming to their limits. For a brief, terrifying moment, no one understood what had happened. Reactors were not supposed to explode. That idea didn't exist in their mental vocabulary. Someone said the reactor was intact. Someone else said a hydrogen tank must have exploded. The ship's supervisor insisted the core was fine. At 1:30 a.m., operators were sent out to inspect the reactor hull. They walked into hell. Chunks of graphite, radioactive, burning, exposed to open air, lay scattered across the ground. The reactor lid was gone. Flames licked upward into the night. Radiation levels were off the scale, literally unreadable by the instruments they carried. Within minutes, the men sent to look were receiving lethal doses. They came back confused, vomiting, their skin already beginning to fail at the cellular level. Back in the control room, denial hardened into command. If the reactor was damaged, it had to be cooled. Pumps were ordered on. Water was forced into a core that no longer existed, flashing instantly into radioactive steam that rose into the atmosphere and drifted toward sleeping cities. At 2 a.m., firefighters arrived. They had been told there was a roof fire. They brought hoses, axes, courage, no protective gear, no warning. They climbed onto burning rooftops and kicked aside glowing blocks of graphite, mistaking them for debris, unaware each piece was silently rewriting their DNA. Inside the control room, operators worked through nausea, headaches, metallic tastes in their mouths. They didn't leave. Some couldn't. Some refused to. They believed, or needed to believe, that their actions still